I think you're about to become an American citizen, aren't you?
I'm not a gun owner, though.
You're not a gun owner.
No.
But this is so deep-rooted amongst Americans, the right and the freedom to hold weapons. And they resist, whenever we talk to people, I mean, and Piers has had much more experience of this, but I think as the Brits who look at what happened in Las Vegas, who cannot understand, well, the simple answer is not just ban access to these weapons as freely as we can see, you can get that access. Why is that so deep-rooted? And is it just all about the Constitution and the rights?
Well, the Constitution itself, when you read the amendment in question, is essentially telling people that in order for there to be a militia, they should have the right to bear arms. And I think that's forgotten. And it evolved really in the 1980s into a more general claim that people should have a right to bear arms as individuals. So I think there is a legitimate argument that the Constitution's being misinterpreted in this respect. But you must acknowledge that although it seems as if there are an enormous number of massacres happening in the United States because of lax gun laws, the homicide rate has actually come down quite significantly relative to, say, the 1980s. Most Americans who fall victims to guns are suicides. Not victims of homicide.
Yeah, well, and so restricting access to guns would also have an effect there.
Yeah, but not necessarily. I mean, in the case of this particular shooter, he didn't have any kind of criminal record, and so it's not clear that tightening up background checks would have stopped him getting the weapons.
Now, your book is very timely, The Square and the Tower. This is about networks, hierarchies, the struggle for global power. And there were two aspects of this that really struck me. One is Trump is, at the age of 70, probably the best exponent of social media on the planet, which is extraordinary. Yeah. How much of an impact do you think his social media activity had on him winning the election?
I think it was decisive. I think if it hadn't been for Twitter and Facebook, if you just imagine that those things hadn't existed, he wouldn't be president, because Facebook in particular was crucial to the campaign. They really used that as a tool to target the message and to demoralize potential Clinton voters. But the Twitter feed is his way of communicating with his base. Remember, around about 40% of Americans still give him a positive approval rating. This comes as a surprise to most Europeans who assume that he's sort of crashing and burning and will be in jail in a matter of weeks. It's not going to happen. The question is, will he get a second term? And that's a pretty solid political base to have. And if you talk to people who support Donald Trump, and I do that, unlike most professors who've never met a Trump supporter, you realise that they enjoy the direct communication and they enjoy the fact that he's politically incorrect and makes gaps. It makes him human.
You touched on it. It's a great word you have. I think it's homophily.
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 Yeah. I know, it sounds like it's probably illegal in Texas.
But this really plays into something I've picked up on recently, which is it's a love of basically only hearing, hanging out with people who share your views.
It's being in your own bubble.
Exactly. Yeah. So in The Square and the Tower, I say, look, we live in this world of giant networks, but the idea that we're all going to get together into one happy global community, which is the Mark Zuckerberg view, is completely wrong. Once you're in a big network, you very quickly form clusters of people who agree with you. Yeah. And if you look at Twitter or Facebook, the same thing emerges. People sit tweeting and retweeting the things they agree with.
And then persuade themselves that that is the majority view.
Well, not necessarily that. Because
well, they then are surprised when Donald Trump wins the election or
That's certainly true. If you were in the echo chamber of the East Coast or the West Coast, you had no clue. You thought she was a 90% certain winner.
Although, just like to point out that Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote.
Yeah, but that's not the system.
Well, I know,
Susanna, that's not the system.
Why do you keep saying that? Is it somehow insignificant?
You know, Trump's answer to that is always, if it had been a different system, I would have played it a different way. And there's actually some truth in that. He would have played it in a different way. And part of what's happening here is that by going in hard on what I'll call cultural issues, Trump is forcing the Democrats increasingly into the identity politics that you will find on any American campus. This doesn't resonate with middle America at all. No. And if the Democrats nominate a left-of-centre candidate like, say, Elizabeth Warren, I think they could lose.
I agree.
And so there is a scenario in which Trump, if he survives the investigations into the Russian meddling in the election, which I think he will, I think that will not be Watergate, could be positioned for re-election. Now, I should make it clear before you get inundated with insanely angry tweets that I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, but I get what his supporters like about him, and that's something that very few people in the elites on the coast
Totally
do.
agree. And that's exactly my position. I would never have voted for Trump myself, not least of which because of his views on gun control.
Right.
But you can't dispute the fact he has an ability to connect with vast swathes of the American public. Neil, I read all your columns avidly. I feel you get Trump better than most in this country who all think he's a complete monster. I think to know the man is to be able to actually understand
I mean,
it.
maybe a complete monster, Piers, but he's a popular monster and a politically very effective monster.
A popular monster. I've always been quite partial to popular monsters myself.
Well, I wonder why that is.
Neil Ferguson. It's called The Square and the Tower. Excellent read. If you like your history, nobody better than Neil Ferguson. So good to see you, mate.
Thank you.